I'm Dr. Dave Purcell, and the purpose of this video is to teach you about the Pastuer filter pipette, which is used to remove water, that is to dry organic solvents containing your product. So what I've got is a centrifuge tube that's got an organic product. I've already removed the aqueous layer, but as you know, there still is some degree of water solvation in the organic layer. So in order to remove the water from this organic layer, I'm going to use a Pastuer filter pipette. And the Pastuer filter pipette will be loaded with a drying agent. In this case, we commonly use sodium sulfate as the drying agent. So to construct the Pastuer filter pipette, I'm going to use a glass pipette, and I'm going to put a small piece of cotton down in the neck of the pipette. That will support the sodium sulfate, which I'm going to dump onto the top. So the first step is preparing the cotton plug, which the first time you do this will take a number of attempts. So to prepare the plug, I'm going to take a piece of cotton and I'm going to pull off a smaller piece of the cotton, and I'm going to roll this cotton into what will be the plug. The plug goes down into the glass pipette, and I use a microscale thermometer to gently push the plug into the bottom of the pipette. Now it's important not to pack the cotton too tightly, otherwise the material, the liquid, will not be able to move through the plug. Right, so at this point I'm ready to put my gloves back on, and I'm going to fill the pipette with sodium sulfate. So as you recall from class, sodium sulfate absorbs water, and when we pass the organic material through the sodium sulfate layer, it will remove the remaining water, leaving us with a dry organic layer. So I'm just going to dump some anhydrous sodium sulfate into the weigh boat. I'm going to crunch up the weigh boat and make a funnel, and I'm going to just gently tap the weigh boat and gradually fill up the sodium sulfate, or fill the sodium sulfate into the pipette. Now, depending on whether you feel there's a lot of water remaining in your organic layer or only a little water remaining in your organic layer, you can fill the pipette with either more or less of the sodium sulfate. So in this case, I've filled it to about 2/3 of the way full. Right, I'm going to mount the pipette now into a thermometer clamp on the ring stand. So I've got my organic layer, and I'm going to run my organic layer through the sodium sulfate drying column and into a 5 ml conical flask. So we typically place the flask into a beaker to give it some support and keep us from accidentally spilling our product. I'm going to get another glass pipette, and I'm going to pull up my organic layer, and I'm going to allow it to gravity feed through the sodium sulfate pipette and into the 5 ml conical flask. Right, so you can see that my material is just through gravity, moving through the column and into the 5 ml conical flask. The water is absorbed by the sodium sulfate in the column, so my remaining organic product is what we call dried. Now there are several techniques you can use to speed this process along. A simple one is to get another suction bulb, place it on top of your Pastuer filter pipette, and very gently add pressure to the top of the column. It's important not to add too much pressure, or you might blow your cotton plug right through the pipette tip, and all of your wet sodium sulfate will now be back in your product. So I'm going to apply some gentle pressure, and you can see that my material moves through the sodium sulfate column and into my 5 ml conical vial. So as a result of using the Pastuer filter pipette, we now have an organic layer that has been dried with the remaining water absorbed by the sodium sulfate in the Pastuer filter pipette column. Now remember, the 5 ml conical flask is easily tipped. Be very careful not to accidentally knock over your vial. That is why we always store our vials in a beaker to give them added stability on the countertop.